thank you all for joining us for our very first meeting on urban orchards. My name is Anthony Lay. I'm Program Manager at Alliance for Community Trees, and we're excited to have everyone join us today. We're here to talk about urban orchards and food forest programs, and to provide an open dialogue on everything that encompasses. So whether you're a seasoned practitioner or want to find out if you should explore fruit and nut trees, we hope you find this as a valuable resource for new ideas. Want to thank our organizers of this meeting for putting this together. As you can see, we have people from across the country who have come together to start this conversation, and we hope that you will continue to join us as we present new topics, post new questions, and gather valuable resources. Wanted to briefly talk about Alliance for Community Trees involvement with urban orchards. We have our Community Groves program, which has funded over 40 orchard projects since 2012. If you want to go to our website, actrees.org, you can read about some of those projects and also the best practices, which we've compiled in our Community Groves guidebook. We just wrapped up our 2014 Community Groves grants, so look for some case studies on those projects coming up soon, maybe even on a future webcast. So this would be set up to be an open forum. We're going to run through a Google group. So for those of you who have signed up for this webcast, you will automatically be added to the group if you have not already been done, if that's not already done. This is where you can post questions, resources, and also find out about future meetings. If you know of anyone who might be interested in joining the group, they can contact orchard@actrees.org to join. Today's meeting will be structured as follows. We're going to have a section, sort of a survey on who you all are and who's interested in urban orchards. Then a presentation by Susan Poizner on her ebook, Growing Fruit Trees That Thrive. And finally, Phil Forsyth from Philadelphia Orchard Project will also share a story from the field. This webcast will be recorded, and a link to the webcast recording will be posted in the Google group later this week. We want to keep this interactive, so if you look on the panel on your right, you can please feel free to use the question box and chat box throughout the webcast. We'll be monitoring that, and the presenters will be addressing questions sort of on the fly. So please, start the conversation there. So to begin, I wanted to provide a quick snapshot of who's joined us. As you can see, we've got a wide range of attendees from nonprofits, municipalities, schools, independent professionals, and volunteers. This is some of the regions, some of the states that we've had. This was actually yesterday, so we've had a lot more people sign up today as well. And we also have some international presence and interest in fruit trees, including Susan, who's from Toronto. To get things kicked off, wanted to ask a quick question about your involvement with urban orchards. And so we're going to put up this poll where you can tell us your experience, whether you're new to fruit trees, you just started, or you've been really experienced in the field. So we're going to run this poll quickly, if you can answer, and this will help guide our presentations and the conversation today. So that should be showing on your screen and right now. Give you about 10 more seconds. Great. Thank you so much. So as you can see, we have a wide range and a lot of new interest to the field. So that's really great, and I think that'll be really helpful for our speakers today. So our first speaker is Susan Poizner. She's a writer, gardener, and urban orchardist. She is one of the founders of the Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard in Toronto, which began in 2009. Over the years, Susan has worked with organic orchardists and other technical experts to help make fruit tree care skills accessible to everyone. She now trains new orchardists across North America through her book, Growing Urban Orchards, and her online fruit tree care workshops at orchardpeople.com. So right now I'd like to welcome Susan. You're on the line, and
Hello, can you hear
take it
me okay?
away. Yep, you sound great. So now
Okay,
you got
terrific.
control.
Thank you so much. So hi everybody and welcome to the webcast. I've got to say it's really lovely for me to be here today, and that's because just 5 or 6 years ago I was so desperate to meet other community orchardists that I could learn from. At that time, I had just founded a community orchard in my local park, and frankly, I didn't know what I was doing and I made a lot of mistakes. So that's why I wrote my ebook that I'm introducing today, Growing Fruit Trees That Thrive, the 5 mistakes orchardists make and how you can avoid them. So let me see how I'm going to move this screen forward. Oh, here we go. Somehow that worked. Okay, so I'm going to start by telling you a bit about me and my experience as one of the founders of the Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard in Toronto. So there we go. This was my local park, Ben Nobleman Park, in 2008. So it's amazing that this guy in the picture rode his bike to the park to do some Tai Chi. That's amazing because nobody else spent any time in this place. I would walk by the park a couple of times a day and it was mostly empty. Each time I walked by, I daydreamed about transforming this space into something really special, something that would bring the community together and something that might even make our neighborhood a bit of a tourist attraction. So during my walks, I would also pass by a very special house. My neighbor Sherry's house is a pretty white house with rivers of flowers all around it. Sherry is a gardener with over 50 years of experience, so I knew if I was going to transform our local park into something special, she would definitely be my partner in that adventure. This is me with Sherry. She's such a lovely person. And still, when I came up with the idea of how we could transform our park, I was sure she was going to tell me I'm crazy. Sherry, I said, I think we should turn our park into a community orchard. And her response? Sure, that sounds like a great idea to me. So we went ahead, but there were so many hoops for us to jump through. First, we had to talk to our city councilor, Joe Mahavik. He's a cyclist and a pretty eco-minded guy, but here in Toronto, a community orchard had never before been established in a public park. Still, Joe liked the idea. So he told us to talk to staff in our city's Parks Department. Amazingly, they supported our initiative too. They asked us to create a drawing that we could show to the community to get community approval. So I worked with a volunteer and landscape architect who created this really great design for us. The idea was that 40 fruit trees would circle our park, leaving the center open for ball playing and kite flying. We hoped that our orchard would help turn this empty park into a vibrant community center where people could come to volunteer, celebrate, enjoy festivals, and other events. In our first community meeting in 2009, it seemed like people liked the idea. We presented our plan, and people clapped politely. A couple of people asked questions. I went home feeling good. But then the problems started. Rumors started to fly about an anti-orchard petition. A couple of women who attended the meeting went door to door, telling others that we were going to turn our local park into a fruit farm. To calm the little neighborhood, our calm little neighborhood was suddenly not so calm anymore. And then came the newspaper article in our city's main newspaper, the Toronto Star. Yes, you're reading that correctly. Neighbors war over urban orchard. Street divided over plan for fruit trees in park. It was that bad. The misunderstandings, the confusion. Many in our community had fears about having an orchard in our park. Would fruit trees attract more bees that would bite small children? Would the trees be neglected and messy? Is city-grown fruit even safe to eat? Some of the questions were really valid, and we wanted to investigate them. So we spoke to experts, and we wrote a research article which we put on our orchard website at communityorchard.ca. Our answers convinced some of the opponents, others not so much. So in the end, our city councilor came up with a compromise. Instead of 40 trees, we would get 14 to start with. Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard would be a pilot project for our city. The attitude was, well, let's see how it goes. But once our trees were in the ground, it didn't take long for me to realize that we had more challenges ahead. You see, we knew we had to prune our fruit trees annually, but we didn't know how to do it. Some of our fruit trees suffered from pest and disease problems, and we didn't know how to treat them. Were our trees growing fast enough? We had no idea. I found conflicting information in books and on the web, and some of the advice that I read seemed far too complex for us as community orchardists to implement. So I brought in experts from the fruit-growing region of our province to teach us. I read compulsively about fruit tree care. I even visited community and organic orchards across North America to learn their secrets of success. And during my journey, I realized that there are a handful of common mistakes that new orchardists make that can really easily be avoided. So whenever I meet or work with people who are starting a new orchard, I say, stop before you make one of the 5 big mistakes that we made. Do your research and then go out and plant and care for your trees. So in brief, I'll cover those 5 key mistakes. You can learn more about them in my free ebook, Growing Fruit Trees That Thrive. So mistake number 1, ordering and planting the wrong trees. It's really easy to pick up potted fruit trees from your local garden center. The problem is that most of these varieties are ones that we're familiar with from our local supermarkets, like Bartlett pears or Macintosh apples. The problem is that these varieties are designed to be grown with commercial pesticides and fungicides, and that's not what we want to do as home or organic growers. So what we found out, of course, after planting our first 9 trees in Ben Nobleman Park, was that there are many specialist fruit tree nurseries across North America selling little known but really rugged and disease-resistant fruit tree varieties that are better for organic and backyard growing. You order these trees in advance, and they'll be sent to you in the early spring as bare root trees, the type of trees you can see in this picture. You plant these trees while they're still dormant, and when the spring comes, they will grow quickly, thrive, and adjust better to your soil than a potted tree ever would. Then there's mistake number 2, watering trees incorrectly. It's so funny because so many times I've worked with groups who want to plant fruit trees and they have a really wonderful site in mind. And I ask them, is there access to water nearby? And they look at me blankly. People think young fruit trees can take care of themselves somehow. Little do they know that if a fruit tree is neglected in the first 3 or 4 years, it will actually be damaged for the rest of its life. And regular watering is part of that care. In Ben Nobleman Park Community Orchard, we needed to water our baby trees twice a week during the growing season. At first, we didn't have an irrigation system in the park, so we watered each tree twice a week with 3 buckets of water each, dragging those buckets from nearby homes. So imagine dragging those buckets around your park. Where's the water hookup? These are all things to keep in mind before you plant your tree. So now mistake number 3, not pruning trees properly or regularly. How many of us have seen fruit trees like this one? The ones that look like they're having a bad hair day every single day. Now, correct fruit tree pruning isn't just to make your tree look pretty. It helps to improve air circulation in your tree and to prevent the spread of disease. It also helps you create a fruit-bearing structure for your tree that will last a lifetime. But it's different than native or ornamental tree pruning. Now, you can learn these skills by attending a fruit tree pruning workshop near you or by learning online. How often do you prune your trees? At least once a year. And when do you start? Well, the answer is from the very first year your tree is in the ground. So now mistake number 4, not monitoring your trees weekly. So you may be thinking, how hard is it really to grow fruit trees? Well, let me put it this way. Young fruit trees are sort of like kids in kindergarten. They get every bug or infection that's going around. And pest and disease problems in fruit trees don't usually just go away on their own. You have to nip these problems in the bud, or they will continue to spread. So it's really important to read more or take workshops to help you learn how to identify different pest and disease problems now, while your trees are still healthy or even before you've planted them. Then, if there's any change in your tree's condition, you'll be ready and you will know what to do. Finally, the 5th mistake that people make is not prioritizing their tree's needs. Fruit trees are amazing. They give us so much. They beautify our gardens with their blossoms, they shade our communities, and when they're treated well, they give us lots of healthy and delicious fruit. But the thing is, in order for our trees to thrive, we need to give to them too. It's a two-way relationship. So we need to give them nutrients in the spring, every spring. We need to use organic sprays sometimes on them to prevent pest and disease problems. We need to remove or thin the fruit so that a heavy harvest won't break their branches. There's a number of simple but essential ways to help our trees to thrive. And if we do these basic things for our fruit trees, they will give back to us exponentially by feeding us and our communities for many years to come. So that brings me to the free 10-page ebook that I have created. I really hope it's distributed far and wide, because each person that learns about these 5 key mistakes doesn't have to make them. And they'll be able to save time and to save money and to avoid the heartache that's involved in seeing your newly planted fruit trees fail. Instead, they can have a successful fruit tree growing journey right from the start. So here's what I'm hoping you'll do. If you haven't got a copy of the ebook yet, download it from orchardpeople.com and read it. Use the interactive links in the book to share it with friends on Twitter or Facebook. And many of us on the call today are involved in community orchards. If you're one of them, contact me at orchardpeople.com and I'll make you a copy of this book with your logo on it that you can put on your website and share. Then your volunteers can share the book with their friends and we can get this message across. Now my story, the story of the Ben Nobleman Park, has a really happy ending, or at least so far. We have 14 fruit trees that are well established and growing bigger and stronger and more productive each year. Our trees have helped us to knit together a wonderful community of volunteers who help to take care of the trees and our pollinator garden. And for many of us, spending time in our orchard park is the highlight of our week. This once neglected park has finally come to life. And just in the last couple of years, we've enjoyed our first harvests of apricots, cherries, and apples. So what did we do right? Well, we made a lot of mistakes, but we were determined to constantly continue learning. And over the last 5 years, I've been able to share what I've learned in my fruit tree care book, Growing Urban Orchards, and on my website, orchardpeople.com, where aspiring orchardists can take online courses in how to grow organic fruit trees. Thank you so much for joining us on the webinar today. I hope you've learned something from me, but more importantly, I look forward to learning a lot
Unmuted.
in future webinars and in presentations. We'll all have opportunities to share our lessons and our stories. And if you want to keep in touch with me, you can find me at orchardpeople.com. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, Susan, for that great presentation and very helpful ebook. So again, if you have any questions, please enter them in the questions box and we'll get to them. I guess, Susan, if you could start by talking about where the fruit that is now being harvested at your orchard, where that's going and how that's distributed.
Sure. Yeah. So what happens is when you plant fruit trees, for the first 2 to 3 years, you actually remove all the fruit from the tree. And that allows the root of the trees to sort of dig in and get settled in, and it'll give you a stronger tree for the rest of that tree's life. So for the first 3 years, we had nothing. After that, we started to be able to enjoy the harvest. Now, a lot of people on this call are working in public spaces. I don't want to disappoint you, but a lot of the fruit does disappear before the community orchard just gets to taste it. We have really enjoyed our apricot harvests. The apricots have been really producing a lot of fruit. The cherry harvest, for 2 years in a row, the fruit was stripped from the tree before we had our harvest day. And actually, it was one person that did it. Somebody saw that person. I think the lesson I learned from it all is when you are growing fruit in a public space, it is for the community. It's for all of us to share. But there's an education component as well, as we teach people, well, there are folks who are taking care of these trees and we want to share it. And maybe we'll create signage at some point saying, please, if the tree is ripe, take 1 or 2 fruits and save the rest for somebody else. So eventually the trees will be more mature in another, let's say, 5 years' time, and we'll be sharing the harvest amongst the volunteers at harvest festivals and giving some to the food bank. I also saw, Phil, you put up a question, how many trees are in Ben Nobleman Park now? We have 14 trees. As I said, we made a lot of mistakes, and one of the biggest ones was choosing the wrong trees in the first place. Many of our original trees are gone. So we planted 9 trees in 2009. I would say 4 of them survived. The other ones got various disease problems, and we were too late to treat them, and they were probably not the best trees to plant in the first place. So while we now have 14 trees, we've had lots more babies than that, and it's been sad to see some of them go. I think that's part of my motivation for teaching people how to care for their trees properly right from the start, because it's heartbreaking to cut down a tree that you love and have put so much love into. You have to do it if the tree is diseased, and the disease will spread, but it would be better to protect that tree in the first place. So hopefully that answers your questions. I'm looking in my chat box here. Does anybody else have a question?
Sure. I got another question here coming in. Could you talk about insecticides, pesticides, those the sprays or your organic sprays, and sort of your experience with those?
Yeah, I write about that in my book. There are certain sprays I would say, personally, everybody should do every year, and that's lime, sulfur, and dormant oil. When you learn to prune your trees, you're going to learn to keep them in a nice compact size. Part of what I teach in my workshops is you don't want to let your fruit tree get huge because the fruit at the top will be wasted, it'll be hard to reach, but it'll also be really difficult to prune and spray that tree. The lime sulfur and dormant oil will help prevent pests, and a lot of gardeners use it. It is considered organic. And it's only once a year. You have to do it at the exact right time of year, but it's really effective. There are other sprays, and I talk about this in my book, Growing Urban Orchards. There are sprays like sulfur spray that can help prevent fungal disease. There's copper spray. There's a few different types of sprays made out of natural materials that we will use when we need to. But mostly it's lime sulfur and dormant oil every spring.
Great. Well, Susan, thank you so much. We'll have you on at the end for any more questions. Again, your website is orchardpeople.com, is that correct?
That's correct.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
So now we will have Phil Forsyth from Philadelphia Orchard Project on. Phil is the executive director. Philadelphia Orchard Project is a nonprofit that plants and supports community orchards in Philly. Since 2007, the organization has worked with community groups to plant 37 orchards full of useful and edible plants in neighborhoods across the city. Phil has led the organization's program since its founding and has over 15 years of experience in urban farming, gardening, and landscaping. Phil also previously owned and operated an edible landscape design business in Philly and has a blog, which you can read at phigblog.com. Phil, welcome. Thanks so much. You're on there.
Thanks, Anthony. Yeah, I want to thank AC Trees and Susan and our other founding network partners, and welcome everyone to our inaugural webcast. I'm glad to be the first speaker for our reports from the field, or and we should call it an orchard report segment. And I'm going to talk about our work here in Philadelphia, and I'm going to
Muted.
see. Let me advance the slide here.
Unmuted.
Why is this not working?
Let me double check.
There we go.
There you go. Got it?
Okay. So I'm going to talk about what we
Muted.
the framework of answering the question, why urban orchards, why community orchards, and I'm hoping that this will be helpful for a lot of our people just getting started with this concept as a framework for you to make your case and find support for your projects. And then I will give a sort of slide tour of what we've done so far, and hopefully we'll have some time for question and answer at the end. So, as Anthony mentioned, our mission is to plant and support community orchards in the city of Philadelphia. We are an independent nonprofit operating since 2007. And I'm going to start with just a quick little history so you understand our context, which may or may not be applicable to your own cities. But Philadelphia, at the turn of the 20th century, 1900, was the wealthiest city in the United States, center of American and even world manufacturing. And over the course of the next 50, 60 years, basically all of that disappeared. We have over 700 abandoned factories in the city today. With those factories went the jobs, and with the jobs went the people. Philadelphia, at its peak, had 2.5 million residents, now has 1.5 million. So about a third of the population left in the course of about 60 years. And this is a story common to many cities in what we call the Rust Belt, former industrial cities of the Northeast. And so with all the people leaving, that left a lot of vacant, empty housing stock, a lot of which was demolished in the 80s and 90s, resulting in 40,000 vacant lots in Philadelphia today, which I understand is the same number as in Detroit. You hear a lot more about Detroit, maybe a higher percentage there. But Philadelphia is the poorest of the top 10 largest cities in the United States, with fully 25% of our population below the poverty line and corresponding high rates of diet-related disease and poor food access. So POP was founded with a pretty simple vision to use some of this vacant land in the city to grow food for the people of the city. And in addition to our 40,000 vacant lots, we also have a pretty amazing and extensive park system, over 10,000 acres of parkland in the city, a lot of which is underutilized. So there's plenty of opportunity to realize this vision. So why orchards specifically? Why are we planting urban community orchards? Most obvious answer, of course, is the fresh fruit. Why else would you plant fruit trees? And so in the last 8 years, we have planted 37 orchards in the city, and we also support another 11 city orchards outside of our standard partnership process. These orchards include over 900 fruit and nut trees, and over 1,400 berry bushes and fruiting vines, and close to 10,000 perennials and ground covers, including pollinator garden plants and also strawberries and things of that nature. So each fruit tree can produce 100 pounds or more of fruit a year. We believe in the long run this will have a real impact on food access, diet, and eating habits of city residents, and hopefully an impact on health as well. And each year we do a partner survey of our community orchards, and they repeatedly report to us about the transformative experience of city residents tasting these fresh fruits directly from trees and bushes for the first time. And last year, our partners reported over 2,500 city residents tasted something grown in our orchards. But before these orchards mature, which can take 5 years or more for fruit trees anyway, they are powerful tools for building community. Last year, our partners reported over 4,000 people used these orchards as gathering space. Each of our orchards is planted in partnership with an existing community group: schools, churches, community gardens, urban farms, and a wide range of different nonprofits. And we are, through those partnerships, building on existing community resources. So what my organization, we call ourselves POP for short, what POP does is, once we've received an application and the partner meets our criteria, we design an orchard for the partner, we source the plant materials, we organize the planting day, or usually planting days. We often plant over the course of several seasons. And then we provide long-term support in training our partners in orchard care. Our partners own, maintain, and harvest the orchards and distribute the produce within their own neighborhoods, thus expanding community control over food resources. We also work with our partners to engage their neighbors through sponsoring seasonal harvest festivals. And we've had, last year was our 4th year of Philadelphia Orchard Weekend, where this year we had 12 events in neighborhoods across the city, inviting neighbors in to experience in these spaces and taste some of the fruit. So another reason for urban orchards is a wide range of environmental benefits. I like to talk about the double carbon offset. So fruit trees, like any other tree, absorb carbon from the air, but at the same time they're producing fruit, and that fruit reduces food miles, or the distance food travels from where it is grown to where it is consumed. And in the United States, the average distance produce travels is 1,500 miles, and that is a huge cost in terms of fossil fuels for transportation and refrigeration. So all the food we can grow in cities reduces the amount of food that needs to be grown and transported from elsewhere. So we're reducing carbon use in 2 ways. You can also look at reducing stormwater runoff, providing shade for neighborhood cooling, and helping to build neighborhood ecologies. I also believe it's very valuable to provide city residents a direct experience of nature that they often otherwise lack. In terms of economy, we are not planting commercial orchards in the city, but there still can be a positive neighborhood economic impact. Many of our partners are urban farms that have agricultural entrepreneurship programs for youth, where kids learn not only how to grow produce, but also how to sell it. There's also, I like to point to a study in 2008 of community gardens in Philadelphia, looking at the impact of food grown in cities. In that year, they studied 200 community gardens in our city, occupying 33 acres of city land. And summer months alone in 2008, those gardens produced 2.2 million pounds of fresh, local, mostly organic produce, with a cash value of $4.5 million, almost all of which was distributed directly to neighbors, family members, and other folks in low-wealth communities. That is real impact and has real economic and household value. And we look forward to measuring the impact of urban orchards in a similar way in the future. I believe the most important thing that POP does is educate city residents, especially children, about where their food comes from. Most city residents are so divorced from their food system that they really don't think beyond the supermarket, the corner store, or the fast food chain as the origin of their food. They don't think about the fact that it was grown on a farm or in an orchard. And so we are providing a direct experience of peaches growing on trees, grapes growing on vines, blueberries growing on bushes. And this is a novel experience for many of our orchard neighbors. So effectively, POP teaches our partners how to grow these foods, and our partners produce the food and convince their neighbors to try them and incorporate them into their diets. And last year, our partners reported to us that educational opportunities was the highest value in terms of impacts on their neighborhoods. And over 3,700 people took part in educational programs at our orchard partner sites. So the last reason I want to mention is permanence. In comparison to vegetable gardens, orchards have a greater sense of permanence, and fruit trees can live for decades, sometimes even centuries. Cities have traditionally regarded urban agriculture as a temporary land use until something else can be built or developed on the land. But I'd like to argue, in looking at the multiple impacts in terms of fresh fruit access, community, ecology, economy, and education, that urban orchards should be accepted and promoted as a permanent part of city infrastructure. So now I'm going to take you on a short tour of some of our orchard sites. Don't have time to visit all 48, but you can see here 37 green markers showing orchards that we've planted in Philadelphia, primarily in low-wealth neighborhoods in North and West Philadelphia. You can also see another 11 yellow markers showing sites that we've partnered with and support outside of our standard partnership process. So here is actually our very first orchard planting in spring of 2007. That we call it the South Philly Teen Orchard. It's planted in partnership with a community center after-school program for teens on a vacant lot that the community center owns around the corner. And I've always loved this photo, just the range of people it shows that get involved in our events and come out to plant these orchards. And the orchard is still going strong today. This is them participating in Philadelphia Orchard Weekend last year with pumpkin and face painting and cider pressing inside their small community orchard. So Richard Allen is one of our school partners, one of about half a dozen school orchards we have in the city. And I like to say that schools are often the most challenging partners, but always the most rewarding. And these kids are just wonderful. They are so thrilled for any experience of nature. They get as excited about the bees and the worms as about the fruit itself. And the amazing thing about growing food at schools is kids will try anything they've had a hand in growing. So I've had kids line up to taste black currants, which, if you've ever had them, is a pretty acquired taste. They'll try things that if you just handed them in another context, they would turn up their nose and not give it a try. We've also got kids liking apples. They've had apples before, but just the mealy, poor apples served in school cafeterias, when we give them a fresh local apple of a really excellent variety, they realize for the first time that they actually like them. Greenfield Elementary is one of our other school partners. This is actually our smallest orchard, and I like to say that in the city, one fruit tree makes an orchard. The school here in their schoolyard has 4 fruit trees and about a dozen berry bushes, and we go back there to visit regularly, a couple times a year, to teach some of the classes about their orchard space. Churches are another one of our partners. We have 4 planted now, and actually we just added one at a mosque as well. Churches are large landowners in the city. They're often also the strongest cultural institutions in these neighborhoods. So great opportunity to connect with people of the city. So this is Temple Presbyterian Church in North Philly. And the pastor here was so overcome to see the first cherries on her tree that she shed tears of joy. And we hope to provide a similar experience to her congregation as the orchard grows. Ogden Orchard, this is sort of an interesting one here. This is was planted at a newly constructed home for adults with autism. And we actually convinced the Department of Housing and Urban Development to spend their landscape budget on a completely edible landscape. So this structure is surrounded by fruit trees and berry bushes and pollinator gardens. It's maintained by a neighborhood nonprofit working with residents of the facility, and the whole neighborhood stops by to pick from it. It's not fenced, and people walk by and pick the fresh strawberries and raspberries as they ripen. Woodford Orchard is one of our flagship orchard sites, planted back in 2008 at a historic house on the edge of Fairmount Park, immediately adjacent to the rather challenged Strawberry Mansion neighborhood, and they do a wonderful job of involving the community. For the past 6 years, we've had a strawberry festival in the spring and an apple festival in the fall. And they are always well attended. People get out to experience these spaces, do some volunteer activities in the orchard, and we often have workshops and art activities and things like that as well. Share Orchard. Share is another one of our flagship sites. So the Share Food Program is the largest distributor of emergency food services in our region, with a 3-acre warehouse in North Philadelphia. And about 3-4 years ago, we helped them to plant an orchard immediately adjacent to their headquarters in a formerly gravel lot. And you can see this is also adjacent to the Tasty Cake factory, which has since shut down. So I guess we won that battle. Today, a few years later, this is formerly gravel lot is now a lush oasis of fruit trees and berry bushes, and part of a really innovative urban farm program where emergency food recipients come and not only taste these fresh fruits grown on site, they see them growing, they also learn how to grow them and potentially take that knowledge home to their own neighborhoods and need less emergency food access in the future. In recent years, we've started to partner with some more high-profile sites in the city. Bartram's Garden is the oldest botanic garden in North America. We've also partnered with Aubrey Arboretum. We've been working in direct partnership with the City of Philadelphia Parks and Recreation Department on plantings at Fairmount Park Horticulture Center and some rec center sites. And this past fall, we partnered with the city in planting the city's largest orchard at the Philadelphia Prison Systems Complex in Northeast Philly, which will be part of a Green Jobs training program they're developing at the facility. So that's a quick summary of our work, and I'd be happy to answer questions.
Unmuted.
Thanks, Phil. That was a really excellent presentation. I'm also going to put Susan back on the air too for some final questions. But my first question for you, Phil, is to talk about anyone for those interested in starting an urban orchard. How could they approach other urban gardens, community gardening groups? Sort of dealing with concerns whether of shade or expertise. From your experience, what's been a good approach to try to incorporate an existing community garden with an orchard?
Well, for the most part, partners have come to us and submitted an application, so we're rarely actually approaching groups in the city and suggesting they plant an orchard. The idea is that the impetus for these projects come from the neighborhoods and communities themselves. Um, but certainly, yeah, once we get an application from a group, there's a process for getting them ready for an orchard. And that involves getting feedback from them on what they'd like to see planted, maybe suggesting some things they haven't thought of. And we also have a number of requirements, steps they have to go through before planting. So our partners collect signatures for a community petition in support of the project. They're required to attend trainings, either by us or we have a wonderful tree tending program in the city that provides good training as well. And we also ask them to come out and participate in another orchard planting at another site before they get their own orchard. So these are all ways for groups to sort of demonstrate their capacity and their dedication and interest, because they will be the ones who have to follow through on caring for these orchards with our training and our support. I don't know if that exactly answered your question.
Sure, no, that's a great point. Especially with your system, your model, that sounds like a really great educational focus to getting people introduced to it. So from the need perspective, I think that's a great model. We have a question coming in. When you partner with schools, what happens to the maintenance during the summer months?
Yes, schools, as I said in my talk, are the most challenging partners to work with. And certainly summer is one consideration. So we've actually concluded with schools that we need a third party to also be a partner, except in the case of maybe an exceptional school with its own resources. But especially in Philadelphia, public schools are so challenged with limited resources and overworked staff and teachers that you really have to limit your expectations for what they can do. So we seek outside partners. There's often other nonprofits involved in providing programming at schools. So we look to involve them as sort of a third party that can especially help in the summer and other times when the school itself can't do the maintenance. And we've seen good success with that model. You need to make sure that you've got both the school and a third party on board, in our experience.
Great, that definitely sounds.
And some schools, I should mention also, some schools do have summer programming. A lot of them do in Philly, actually.
Oh, excellent. Can you talk a bit more about sort of your process of getting applications from groups, and is there a sort of certain time frame? How do you review those as an ongoing basis?
Sure. So yeah, we accept applications with two due dates. So one is just past January 15th, and that was to be considered for planting this fall. And then the other due date is July 1st to be considered for planting in the following spring. So it's about a 9-month lag time, and that allows for us to vet the application and the partner and get them to go through the steps I mentioned of preparation in advance of the orchard planting. Yeah, we actually imposed that timeline a couple years ago. We used to try to do it on much more protracted timeline of a few months, and that just wasn't enough. Mm-hmm. So, and yeah, I think that's the answer to your question.
Great. Got a question for both of you. There's a lot of species of fruit, and sort of are there more popular fruit that people request, or do you try to as far as your expertise, native fruit species are easier ones to grow. Where do you fall on that spectrum of demand and education?
Sure. So the demand is usually mostly for the more popular common fruits like apples and peaches, and blueberries. But so there is a process of training. So I always inform our partners that those fruits are actually the most difficult to grow. Apples and peaches, um, plums, apricots, cherries are all quite pest and disease prone, and will take some time and knowledge to take care of. Um, and we do plant them, but I also do suggest and strongly recommend that people considering planting more unusual fruits, depending on your climate. Here we can plant figs and persimmons, native plants like pawpaws and juneberries, and some more unusual fruits that people probably are not aware of or haven't thought about, that are just as delicious but much, much easier to grow. And as Susan mentioned in her talk, you also want to think about varieties. So if you are planting apples, look at varieties that are more disease resistant. That'll save you a lot of effort down the road.
Yeah, I'll add to that. It's Susan. And totally, there are a lot of interesting varieties that have been developed in the last, I don't know, 25 years. So varieties like Liberty or Freedom, these are apple trees with types of apples that you will have never tasted before because you can't get them in the supermarket. So if you are going to take the plunge and say, okay, yeah, I want to learn the skills to grow more conventional fruit, those are the ones to go for. There's one called Novamac and Novaspy. So all of these have fewer problems. And I also do recommend, we have June berries, or we call them service berries here. They grow really easily. They do sometimes have some fungal problems, but they're fantastic, and you don't have to worry as much about pruning and care. So what I tell people is to research what grows easily in your community and to talk to other local growers in your community. It's a great way to meet people, to get inspiration, and to learn what works and what problems you will face and how you will face them.
I would
Excellent.
also want to add that to consider planting berry bushes in addition to fruit trees. They tend to be relatively low maintenance, easy to grow, and they also, in a community orchard setting, are going to provide yields in the first or second year, whereas fruit trees, as we've mentioned, can take several years before you get your first fruit and 5 to 10 years before you're getting a lot of fruit.
And as an extra bonus to that, when you plant all these different things together in one spot, you actually are confusing the pests. So in a monoculture, the bugs look at this and say, wow, apple tree buffet, you know, we coddling moths can get under the skin of the apples and have a great time. But when there are berry bushes and different types of fruits and flowers and vegetables, the bugs are kind of confused, and you hope they will fly over your orchard and go somewhere else and won't set up shop in your orchard.
Excellent. Thank you both so much for joining us for this very first webcast. Wanted to, in honor of time, to move forward with a few closing items here. But again, thank you both.
And thank you, Anthony.
Thank you.
Great. So obviously these questions are excellent. Please post them to the Google group forum. Species questions, those things would be excellent topics for that to continue the conversation. One last piece wanted to think about, a very important question is what we should call ourselves. What's the name of this group so that we can help spread it around and get more people interested in fruit and nut trees. So I wanted to post this quick poll with these bottom three ideas, which the organizers have come up with. So if you could just take a quick second to choose your favorite name, and that'll help us determine steps to move forward with. So I'm going to launch the poll right now. About 5 more seconds. Great. Thank you so much for participating and for your feedback. Looks like Community Orchard Network is a popular name, so that one might just stick. So thank you so much for your great feedback on that. Final reminders, if you're interested in sharing this group or presenting to the group, you can have people contact orchard@actrees.org to either join or to discuss potentially presenting. And I also wanted to ask you all to please take a short survey at the end of this. This will be getting your feedback on how often you would like this group to meet, how long you would like this group to meet, and in what format, whether you want to do a webcast, video chat, conference call. This feedback will be really great in making sure that this is a valuable resource to everyone interested. And so we will be announcing our next meeting on the Google Group forum. As I mentioned earlier, everyone who registered for this webcast will be automatically added. So that should be happening later today. So you'll start receiving emails from different posts, as well as the announcement of our next meeting. So please stay tuned, and thank you all so much for joining us.